They don't really get it until you start telling them things like wind washing of their insulation, that it's probably just as important as the insulation, and you're wasting your money on things like that if you don't get a good air tightness level. And I think that's when the light bulb moment happened for them. They read how passionate I was about it and why you wouldn't build anything else.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. You can also check out our Reimagined Buildings YouTube channel for some great inspiration for both building new or renovating. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How are you going, Zach?
It's going great. We had a short week. We had a Memorial Day
Memorial
holiday
Day
on Monday. Yeah, so it's blown by, and so it's already almost the weekend again. It is the weekend where you are.
It is the weekend when we're recording this, and it's also winter officially. We ticked over to winter on the 1st of June. Didn't really make much difference because it was already pretty wet and a bit cold. But we're officially now in winter.
Yeah. Well, we spent the weekend on San Juan Island between Washington State and British Columbia.
Oh, I've been to San Juan Island. That is an amazing part of the world. Were there whales?
There were whales. We did not see the whales. There were some transient orca whales that apparently were sighted around the island, but we missed them.
Lots of people into wooden boat building.
The Salish Sea is just an amazing place, and incredible history of the different Salish tribes there. A rich tradition of canoe building, and there's a lot of kayaking happening and sailing. And I've been meaning to take sailing lessons for quite a while, so I actually was inspired by the trip and finally signed up for a crash course. I'm taking the American Sailing Association 101 class in
Awesome.
Over 2 days in August. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Go you. Well, I'm heading off to with my daughter to a velodrome this weekend, so I'm doing something new as well. Going to learn how to ride around in circles.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. That's exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be good fun. All right, but we should get into this week's interview. I've got a good episode with a builder, and I always love talking to builders. Mark Van Haandel is a Melbourne-based builder who I heard speak at the Thrive Passive House conference in Sydney recently. So I had a nice catch up with him this week. But before we get into that, let's do a quick shout out to supporters of this show and the Accelerator.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything we do at the Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast, comes thanks to these fine organizations and their support. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel, Minutair, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient Comfort, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. We also want to do a special thank you to this week's Passive House Accelerator partner. Our Accelerator partner of the week is Databased Plus. So they are supporting all of the programming we're doing this week. So a big thank you to Databased Plus.
Oh, that's a new and slightly different one.
Indeed. So the Passive House Accelerator partner program is essentially architects and consultants and other service providers who are supporting the Accelerator's work. And so we're really excited to have the support from Database Plus. And
Nice.
if you're interested in supporting the Accelerator in this way, let us know at podcast@passivehouseaccelerator.com.
Very good. All right. Now, Mark Van Haandel, as I mentioned, he's a builder based in Melbourne who has been embracing sort of green, sustainable design for a while. He followed in his father's footsteps and trained as a relatively traditional Australian builder, but he wanted to do something a little bit more. And in this chat, we talk about how he first came across Passive House and how this has now changed his company, MVH Constructions. Well, let's start out with where you are in the world, Mark. You're in Melbourne?
Yeah, g'day, Matthew. Yeah, I am in Melbourne, in Eltham, so northeast of Melbourne. So nice leafy spot.
Melbourne officially now the largest city in Australia.
Oh, has it? It's growing pretty quickly. So
just pipped over the. Well, I think that there was a slight administrative change and change of boundaries. But I heard just before the Thrive conference, actually, the Melbourne had just climbed slightly bigger than Sydney. And is that where most of your clientele is, as we do most of your building work?
Yeah, it's a pretty sustainably focused area, being sort of a leafy green wedge type area. So yeah, we do have a lot of work around here.
And describe the climate for us. You do get pretty warm summers there, but does it also cool down a bit in the winter time?
Yeah, we do. So winter, overnight temperatures in winter generally hover around, they don't get much below zero where we are. You'll wake up with a frost on your car, maybe -1, and then summers we can get up to early 40s, which isn't a regular temperature, but yeah, it's not uncommon to maybe have half a dozen days plus 40 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, and warm nights as well.
Yeah, many nights don't. Some nights sort of stay around sort of early 20s or mid 20s.
All right. So, how did MVH Constructions come about?
So I did a carpentry trade back when I finished school. Wanted to be a builder, and so went down the path of getting all my tools, doing my time, and then starting sort of the extension process, renovation process, and slowly building up the project since then. So it's been something that I've sort of done off my own back, and I run the company by myself on the tools, probably sort of half the time or 3/4 of the time. It's something that I really enjoy still. But also by being a builder, I get to sort of engage with the architects and owners and really have a say in how we build the projects. Did
you know at high school that you wanted to be a builder?
I knew I didn't want to go to university, so right. I didn't have much choice. So yeah, it was that way for probably sort of the last couple of years of high school. So it's something that I wanted to do for a long time.
Have you got any builders in the family, or where did that come from?
Yeah, we do. So my dad's a builder. I've got uncles in construction. So yeah, it's something that I was pretty familiar with growing up.
Yeah,
and a building site was a pretty familiar place for me to be at on a weekend or on school holidays.
How was your training process? How would you describe the process of becoming a builder in Australia?
Post apprenticeship or post being a carpenter, I suppose.
Well, how did they vary?
So carpentry, you obviously learn the trade of I was lucky enough to be with a builder who did a start to finish project. So learned all facets of carpentry, from slab set out through to the framing, through to the fix, through to the lockup. Whereas I think these days a lot of carpenters or apprenticeships are more focused on one particular aspect of carpentry. So whether they're just framers or just fixers or just doing the lockup. So I was lucky enough to be with a builder. We do a couple of jobs a year from start to finish. So I really got to understand how to be a builder as well as just a carpenter and the project management. And post that, went and did a certificate for building or building construction Cert 4, which then got me ready to sit the builder's license test.
Right. Any mention of sustainability or energy efficiency?
No.
Right. But it does sound like it does sound like you got I mean, that's a pretty important, well-rounded training in terms of like customer service and that whole journey of delivering a whole house. So, it sounds like it was pretty good in that respect.
Yeah, it was. I wouldn't change how I did it. Like, there'd be months that we wouldn't put a nail bag on because we'd be getting ready to do the landscaping for a project and things like that. So it really was from sort of site setup to cleaning the house ready for people to move in.
Right.
Which at the time I thought, come on, all I want to do is stand up frames and do everything that a proper carpenter should.
Yeah.
But looking back on it, just really seeing how to be able to deliver those projects and what's involved from start to finish, and not just going in to do your one part and then moving on to the next job was really invaluable.
So when did you first hear about Passive House?
So Passive House, a friend of mine, Sven from Maxa Design, I caught up with him for a coffee probably in 2017 or 18. And we were building, we called ourselves a sustainable builder. We called ourselves a green builder at that point. But we were finding that our projects at the start, the clients were very keen to build a sustainable house. But as soon as the budget started to really need to be refined, the first thing to go would be water tanks, would be solar panels, would be whatever we were trying to do. And mind you, it was pretty entry level what we were doing to call ourselves a green builder, not deliberately, but that's all we knew.
Right. What was the motivation initially for calling yourself a green builder or going down that path? Was it sort of
I think just I've always been loved camping, loved the environment, loved the outdoors,
right,
and wanted to. I suppose the little hippie in me wanted to be able to build it in a way that was more environmentally focused and more sustainable. So caught up with Sven for a quick coffee one day and sort of complained to him or had a bit of a whinge about why our project started off this way and ended up this way. And he said, "Have you heard about Passive House?" And I said, "No." And so we went, he said, "Well, look into it. We're starting to sort of get into it a little bit." So looked up the courses. There was a course starting in a few months, enrolled, literally knowing nothing about it. And in the first 2 or 3 hours of the course, literally blew my mind and thought, what is this? These people are what they're talking about, and went down that rabbit hole that essentially I'm still well down.
And was that the tradesperson course?
Yeah, it was. So that was taught by Burkhard from Carbon Light.
Yep.
And just the passion of that and saying, listen, this is how we need to be building, guys. And it's a non-negotiable once you bring in the Passive House principles. You can't say, well, let's factor out this or factor out that. And it's an all on board, backed by science process that really resonated with me, to be able to have guidelines to build by and say, listen, this is what we're trying to achieve. As I said, it had me on board straight away.
And Burkhard's, a lot of his training is in a workshop as well, right? So it's not necessarily in a classroom.
Yeah. So in terms of the training, no, we did most of it in the class. We did go out and do a site tour and went out to his factory and looked at how he did his prefab systems. But the rest of it was spent, at a desk.
How'd you find that?
It was a bit of a challenge to stay focused. Lots of coffee. And I think being surrounded by builders, I think they did tailor it towards our short attention spans and but not probably a lot of us not being in a classroom for some time. So it was probably we're probably eased into it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's some quite some full on stuff in there, and for a room full of people who have probably a reasonable number have intentionally decided not to go to university, to find yourself in that situation, having to look at some pretty full on building science. I imagine it could be pretty intimidating, but also really interesting. You know, if you can see the value of it and are excited by it, then it makes it doable.
Yeah, the passion really got the attention span focused on it, and I'm sure if it was something else or a different topic, I may have been looking out the window a little bit more. But
Yeah.
it was a few parts of it definitely was a struggle, but most of it just hearing about and seeing case studies of projects, especially in New Zealand and things like that, of houses that have gone terribly wrong down the track.
Yeah.
Just show that this is the way to build.
I imagine it's a bit of a commitment. It would have been a bit of a commitment because you're on the tools, you're running a business, and then you got to go on at least a 5-day course.
Yeah.
So there's that risk, but also, what was the market like? Were you confident that you would get something commercial out of doing that course?
No, when I did it back then, anyone who said, like, you'd have trades ringing you up during the week saying, I'm at site, can you explain how to do this? And they say, what are you doing this week? You say, the Passive House Tradesman course.
Yeah.
And no one knew what Passive House was. Like,
right.
Even like on the weekend, we caught up with some friends. What have you been doing? Passive House. And I just wanted to blurt it out and tell the world, you know what I mean? Oh, you heard about this thing.
Yeah.
And people were getting confused with passive solar. They really didn't. And you'd start to explain it and you'd watch their eyes glaze over a little bit. But yeah, I had this thing that, yeah, as I said, I was super excited about and wanted to implement it on all my projects straight away. But realised that being a builder, like, you're committed to projects sort of 1-2 years out, and it definitely was had to slowly implement it into the business process.
Right. So how was that going back to your regular projects that you had?
Yeah, it was definitely tricky. And the job we were on at the time, I got back to it and could all of a sudden see all this stuff that I thought, geez, there's a thermal bridge there and the windows, like, do you know what I mean? There's an awning window here and air tightness. But I think from that point on, we made the change that we made the conscious decision that all our projects were going to be based on the principles, or essentially implement the principles as best we can, until we got our first certification. So we sat down with clients and said, listen, have you heard about a HRV, or we're actually going to wrap your project up like this? And a lot of it, we wore the costs of our own back, just to get the boys trained to do that. And it meant that when we did get our first certified project on board, like, the boys just hit the ground running in terms of wrapping and detailing and everything else.
Awesome. So tell us about that first certified project.
So yeah, it was finished. It was only finished last year. So it was sort of 18 months in the planning, working with Maxa Design. And we did a house in Surrey Hills, which is eastern suburbs Melbourne. A big house, 360 square metre floor area, and got down to, I think, we're 0.32 air changes at the end. It was conventionally stud built, or stick built on site, 140 mil frame around the outside, and really focused not just on the passive house principles of it, but the sustainability of the project. We used Accoya cladding throughout the project, and then saved sort of the hardwoods and things like that for the interior, where so we try to reduce the maintenance on the outside of the project and use, we thought, timbers that were more suited to be in outdoor conditions and sunlight and winter and things like that.
I love that. I'm just looking at some of the image you have on your webpage. I love the hoarding on site, I guess, during the project, which is basically a big blackboard explaining what a passive house is. Yeah,
so we wanted to, again, like when I finished the course, sing from the rafters what we were doing. And we thought, how do we do this in a way that we can create hoarding that is more sustainable? So not just PVC banners and site mesh. So we essentially got marine ply, painted it like a blackboard, and got our paint, who was also a sign writer, to paint it. So we've now taken it to another site and literally just changed a few words on it. And it wasn't so much to try to drum up more business for us, but trying to drum up more challenging people about the way they think about how their house is getting built or what they want to get built. So if that helped, if somebody went back and said to their builder, they're building a passive house up the road and it says all electric and it says things like that, our job's done.
So in that one, was the client on board? Did they come wanting a passive house?
No, not at all. We'd done 2 jobs for them previously. They'd wanted to change areas. So they came to me and said, listen, Mark, we've bought a block. Who do you suggest we talk to? And we sort of said, ring up these sort of 2 or 3 people. They came back to us a few months later. And I mentioned passive house to them and said, listen, ring up these few people and talk about passive house. And they came back to me a few months later and said they were talking to these other architects who were completely non-passive house architects.
Right.
And I think I could see that they were still a little bit lost. And so I think I was having my breakfast and I got on the computer and typed this email that was just this verbal vomit, so to speak. That it just like blurted out passive house like the ages, didn't proofread it, just sent it off to them. And I think that's when the light bulb moment happened for them. They read how passionate I was about it and why you wouldn't build anything else. And they were on board ever since after that. It was just really just focused on, we get what you're saying. We understand that this is what we need.
Yeah.
And so it was really, really a good moment in time of how to sort of say, well, listen, this is what really shifted the focus on this.
And what are the sort of main learnings from the project for you and your team?
I think just to have a really good team on board, which we did. Everyone knows what they're doing. A really good schedule, and really just focus in on sort of just who I think just standard building basics of just sticking to schedules, making a really good work environment for the team, setting everyone up for success, and kicking a goal out of it. So it's as I said, we went in super focused on what we were going to do and really well planned. So I don't think there was any major learnings from it.
Right.
It was a super big house, and it did take a long time to build it, and the cladding sort of all being clad in shiplap cladding, like it was immense doing all that. But it was great.
Have any other members of your team done the training now?
No, we're looking at putting our lead carpenter through it. But
so you've been the sort of the main conduit of all the information.
Yeah, they've gone and done some of the Pro Climber wrap courses and things like that, but definitely not the certificate or the trades course.
Has it been a challenge explaining to your team or your clients or anyone else about air tightness? Because it's a bit of a foreign concept in Australia.
Yeah, it's a real foreign concept. I was surprised the uptake on it. Like when I started saying, like, you can't put a hole in this without telling me or whatever.
Uh-huh.
You sounded like you were speaking a foreign language to them, but all of a sudden, once they got it, and I think once they see the challenge that they're actually going to get tested on it with a blower door, I think that's when their ears prick up. I think if you didn't have that blower door challenge or test, and you said to them, all right, well, we just need to try to make this thing airtight, they wouldn't. It probably wouldn't resonate with them. In terms of the clients, they don't really get it until you start telling them things like wind washing of their insulation, that it's probably just as important as the insulation, and you're wasting your money on things like that if you don't get a good air tightness level. That's when their ears prick up and you say, well, listen, if you're going to spend all this money on insulation, you have to be doing this.
Right.
And that's when they're on board. We're lucky enough now that most of the clients who come to us know about Passive House and they want to build a passive house, so they know the principles. They know that. So we're not trying to sell it as much as what we were a few years ago to people, saying, listen, this is what I've done in this course, and keep bringing it up to an architect who hadn't heard about it and saying, well, we can't do this and we can't do that. So it's definitely a lot easier now.
Yeah. And you've got a bunch of other stuff as well as the Passive House going on. And you mentioned that you're wanting to do sustainable stuff and green building for a while. Tell us about your recycling efforts.
So on our sites, we didn't want to just have a house that was comfortable to live in and healthy to live in. We wanted to make the whole process from start to finish as environmentally conscious as possible. So we have on our sites, we have what we call a recycling facility, which is pretty basic, but it's segregating all our materials that come onto site that aren't used or that are waste into different categories, and then taking them to the appropriate places to get recycled or reused. And we're now trying to implement that into the demolition of the buildings that we're doing as well. So rather than calling it a demolition, potentially calling the repurposing or of the old building. So
that's all well and good on site, but the challenge is what to do with that. Are you finding people that are getting on board to help with where to take all that material?
We find that we are in that middle band, that we're not big enough for the bigger companies. We're not producing enough stuff for the bigger companies to take, and we're too big for a lot of just the local transfer stations. So a lot of time has been spent behind the scenes, just ringing different companies, seeing what we can do with products, or trying to either come together with other builders and saying let's pool all our materials together and make it more appealing for a third party to take. So we've now got some bins for our soft plastics in our factory, and we're speaking to other builders who we're friends with, saying, listen guys, bring your stuff here, because if we get this amount of soft plastic here, so and so will take it. Whereas in the past, as I said, they said we won't come out to take it unless you get X amount of soft plastic. So
it's a great initiative. I mean, it sounds like it's an uphill battle because the system's set up so easy just to chuck everything in the skip and it all goes to landfill.
It's so like I think they say 38% of all landfill in the country is created by construction and demolition in Australia. So it's almost half, or I suppose it's a bit over a third of waste.
And perpetuating that, keeping on going, is the path of least resistance. So you're wanting to change that is actually harder work and probably more expensive. It's
definitely more time consuming. It is. You don't. By saying that you recycle something doesn't mean that you're saving money. You're right. I don't think it is massively more expensive. We don't charge any extra than what we used to charge for our waste management on site.
Right.
And I think once you have the system set up and the different bins, it's pretty easy to do. It just requires a bit of forward thinking and things like that. So we, you just need to know, listen, our plasterers are here. We need to have a bin set up for them. They throw all their clean plaster into there and ring up so-and-so, and they come out and grab it and repurpose that. So I think it is going to become more and more important as places like Melbourne continue to grow and expand. There's just less room for landfill, but also it's becoming a carbon issue as well, and reducing that embodied carbons is going to become more and more important. Construction waste can definitely play a part in that. So I think you're ahead of the curve there, which is great. Where to from here, Mark? What's coming up for you, and where do you want to go in the next few years? I think really just consolidate ourselves as being a really good passive house builder. in Melbourne. We don't want to grow exploratory. We don't want to grow massively. So yeah, as I said, just keep ticking the boxes of being able to provide a really good product for our clients and building, as I said, a couple of homes a year, a few homes a year, and being able to, as I said, I still enjoy putting the nail bag on and getting out there with the boys and having a bit of fun, as well as delivering good projects. So we'll keep, as I said, building Passive House. We know that everyone will join the club essentially down the track, and everyone will have to be building to a lot higher standard. We'll just keep enjoying what we do, and we'd like to. One thing we would like to do is get involved with more architecturally designed passive houses, and really prove to people that passive houses just aren't boxes that look quite boring, and really push the envelope a little bit on making passive house sexy, essentially.
Nice.
So if we can do that and have people, because a lot of the time people come to us and say, well, with the passive houses we've seen look like a monopoly house, and we wanted to look like this, or we're working with an architect who said we can't have big windows and things like that. So push the boundaries a little bit, but stay within the means of passive house and see what we can do.
Nice. Awesome. Hey, we'll keep up the good work. Thank you for your chat today. Really enjoyed it. And we'll look forward to seeing where things go.
Thanks, Matthew. Cheers.
And that was Mark Van Haandel, who is a builder based just outside of central Melbourne in Australia. And it was awesome catching up with him or hearing him speak at the Thrive conference recently in Sydney. And then also getting the chance to chat with him individually for this conversation and find out a bit about the Surrey Hills project. We'll put a link to that in the show notes so you can have a look at the pictures there. And also just kind of the general direction of MVH Constructions, but also just Passive House in general and where it's going in Australia. What do you think, Zach?
It was great. Hearing about his childhood growing up around construction sites was very familiar to me. I also did that, but I never did anything with it. I don't build stuff at all. So it's fun to hear about his early days of building, and then that moment when he described it as his mind being blown at that tradesperson course, and how that kind of set the path for him to the degree that now he's talking about singing from the rafters what we're doing, this new way, and this desire to challenge people and to think differently about buildings.
Yeah, I mean, like I said in the intro, I just really love talking with builders, because I think they tend to be a little bit nervous, particularly in conferences, but they often produce some of the more memorable presentations, because they're very they just tell it like it is, really. Mm-hmm. And it was a great panel. I think it's good getting a group of builders together. One of the things that Mark said to me was he was surprised during the training that he took with Burkhardt from Carbon Light, of just how open all the other builders were there, and how open Burkhardt was himself in sharing information. We hear that so often around Passive House and Passive House conferences, and I guess it's quite refreshing for builders to come into that space and hear people talk about all the mistakes they made, and this is how you do things, and here's a great tip, and it's just really it's useful, but also very refreshing to have that philosophy of sharing information, knowledge. I should mention Burkhardt just briefly. I've known Burkhardt for a while. We've probably mentioned him on the show. I've interviewed him on the Homestyle Green podcast. He runs an organization called Carbon Light, which has started out doing panelized systems in Melbourne, and now he runs some of the tradesperson Passive House training in Melbourne. So he's one of those people that his name often comes up, and his name was mentioned multiple times during the Thrive conference in Sydney, and he's a real leader in the industry and just doing some really fantastic stuff, particularly for tradespeople and builders. So a big shout out to Burkhart of Carbon Light. What else, Zach?
Well, you mentioned the blackboard kind of display that he had up on one of his construction sites. It's featured on the website, so I went to it and took a look. It's this really it's this really long construction kind of site, a barrier, I think, or fence/wall. Very attractively put together, and it's a great communication piece about Passive House to anybody who's coming by and curious what's on the other side, what's going on over there. And so one line, so it asks the question, what is a Passive House? And it has a couple of great bullet points, and one is, it's a fresh, vibrant home which has no mold or allergens. So good, solid, compelling communication around Passive House, which is good to see as well.
That is good. I love putting that, trying to think about the benefits rather than, because we so often talk about it's air tightness and it's high performance windows. It's like, but what does that mean for the average consumer walking past a building site? And that's so good, because building sites can be pretty ugly places, and you get these wire fences and maybe a few supplier signs and a bunch of orange cones, but that's such a great way of using that space in an informative way and an attractive way, instead of just having a really ugly chain link fence.
Indeed. Another thing you mentioned these kind of recurring themes, like one of them being the sharing that is so prevalent in the Passive House community. Another theme that we hear from folks who are a little bit on the pioneering edge of this movement in different places of the world is that initially it's a lot of work to communicate about the benefits, and you get some eyes glazing over when you're just talking about what Passive House is and stuff, and maybe a little cajoling, and clients maybe initially feeling like, I want to save money and remove this feature, this design element or whatever. But then you get to a place in your career where you have people approaching you in order to do a Passive House. And so it was great to hear that that's been Mark's experience, that now folks are coming to him. And so now he's at this place where he's taking this next step around, okay, well, let's prove that these houses don't have to be boring architecture. He's evolving also to thinking about like working with architects to make that happen.
Yeah, and it seemed it didn't take very long, because Surrey Hills was his first certified Passive House, but even that one, that the clients didn't come to him wanting a Passive House. He sort of sold the idea of the high performance, and then went ahead and did one. So it may really only take one or two projects of that type to really establish yourself as a whether you're a design firm or a building company, as being that's what you do, which is really encouraging. I think that's a positive sign for the industry, the state of awareness in this part of the world, not just full Passive House, but recognizing the elements that do make a really good, healthy building, such as air tightness as well, which is still quite a foreign concept. So, getting people on board with that from the builders through to the clients is really important. So it's great that we have more and more of this happening. The other thing I spoke to Mark about was about keeping his business sustainable, and I always find it interesting talking to builders about what size is the optimum size for them. Mark is still on the tools and obviously really keen to stay while he can. He enjoys still being part of the build team, and his company is at that point where if he grew any more, he would probably not be able to do that, because he would have to be managing more people and then employ site supervisors. And I've heard that a lot from builders who get to this sort of threshold of managing a team or managing maybe two to three building sites per year, And then there is often an opportunity to grow if they want to, but it becomes a much different beast after that point. And you just kind of ask yourself, is this a sustainable business, or how big do I want this thing to grow, and what do I want my role to be part of it? Because it's got to be sustainable, enjoyable for the people working the business as well as what the product is.
Right. That's a big shift to then be, tethered to a desk.
Yeah, and people get into, like Mark, get into building because they want to be out doing that stuff and working with clients. They don't want to necessarily be the one who's managing things in front of a computer all day.
Yep.
Awesome. Really good stuff. I've got some more interviews lined up with people because there were some really great content at the Thrive conference, and it's just really great to see the design of houses in Australia and in this part of the world. Well, anywhere where there's a more temperate climate, still dealing with those winter temperatures, but also figuring out how to make buildings look beautiful, but perform in summer as well as in winter as well. So it's great to see that starting to happen with our own flavour of design in Australia and also here in New Zealand. Awesome. So what do we got coming up on the Accelerator, Zach?
Yeah, so this coming week, we have a 101 episode of Passive House Accelerator Live. So that's on Wednesday here in North America and early Thursday morning for you in New Zealand. We're joined by Michelle Apigian of Icon Architecture, and Michelle is one of the leaders of multifamily passive house design in Massachusetts, and that's quite a place to be a leader because Massachusetts is going gangbusters right now with multifamily passive house. She'll be presenting 10 steps to designing a multifamily passive house at the 101 series. And then the next week, we have a next gen episode of the show on June 14th here in North America. So June 15th for you. We'll be joined by Kara Haggerty Wilson of Onion Flats, and she is presenting Minimize, Maximize, or Balance, designing for net zero on an urban site. And then the following day, on Thursday, we have a special component spotlight, Passive House component spotlight that we are presenting with PH Air Seal, and that is entitled Guaranteed High Performance Air Sealing with PH Air Seal. And PH Air Seal uses the Aero Barrier product. So folks who are interested in that should check out that special component spotlight. And there's also lots of other stuff going on in the community that we will include a link to our newsletter so that folks can get details about all that stuff.
Yeah, do head on over to Passive House Accelerator, sign up to the newsletter, check out the YouTube channel Reimagine. Some great stuff happening there. And I've seen some people using those videos, embedding those videos into their own websites as well, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that's great to hear. Awesome.
Yes. And there are some really great resources. Like I said before, really good to share that with others. If you're a designer or a builder and you've got clients who are maybe on the fence about Passive House, then send them over to that YouTube channel because there's some really great explainers and interviews with people and projects that people can have a look at that will help you to communicate what Passive House is and why it's such a good idea.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Great interview. Thanks for bringing that to us.
Thank you. We'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.